Some terrible things are happening to our children. They are becoming the marketplace for unscrupulous corporations. They're no longer people. They're no longer youngsters that are going to grow up and become adults.
I'm profoundly interested in wearables. The company, and they started making electronic tattoos. Work with them to advance a tattoo that could be used for authentication. So I'm wearing one here on my arm, and it has an antenna and some sensors embedded in it.
They're markets. Everybody's trying to make a market in our children.
I think the cure is mind reading, and I think we're going to accept that cure.
So you've got your limbic system, your cortex, and the tertiary layer, which is the digital AI extension of you. And that high bandwidth connection is what achieves the types of viruses.
But there's still some fundamental problems that we haven't solved. Like one of them is the mechanical mismatch between humans and electronics.
His company is working on a way to plug in your brain to a computer chip.
And everyone will wear them because people have shown that they're quite willing to give up privacy for convenience.
Electronics are boxy and rigid, humans are curvy and soft. That's a mechanical mismatch problem.
You want kids buying something? How about ways to kill yourself and why to kill yourself? What is that? That's not the higher human intellect educating us. That's the evil part of human intellect, doing anything to make a buck off children. What about all the junk food? Why are our kids obese? Why are they going to grow up and have heart disease in an early age? Because the adults in our culture are more interested in making money selling them garbage. Why aren't our kids exercising in school as much anymore? Why aren't they doing as much music and dance and other fun things? Not because they want to grow into the kind of human beings that founded this nation, who thought a lot and read and considered life. You got videos that are destructive to human values. You got videos about suicide or movies or whatever. Show it to kids. Kids will buy it.
And we're probably not going to accept it because we're old. Our kids, maybe even our kids' kids are going to be the first people to adopt it, and then it's going to be universal worldwide.
It may be true that 10 to 20-year-olds don't want to wear a watch on their wrist, but you can be sure that they'll be far more interested in wearing an electronic tattoo, if only to piss off their parents.
Essentially, vast numbers of tiny electrodes that are able to read write from your brain. I think that's the best outcome. I hope so. If anybody's got better ideas, I'd love to hear it.
The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat ADHD in children.
It delivers electric pulses to your kid's brain while your kid sleeps.
One of the biggest disasters of all was when the drug companies decided and the government aided and abetted them in turning our children into a market for psychiatric drugs. I know something about this tendency to abuse children. In the 1970s, I stopped through years of reform work, operations on little black children in Mississippi with electrodes hanging out of their heads. It was very hard to get anybody even interested in it. Maybe because it's so terrible. What came in freaked me out. I could not believe the stuff these people were sending to me. What I found that most upset me was that at the University of Mississippi in Jackson, a surgeon named O.J. Handy was operating on little children as young as age 3, 4, and 5 for hyperactivity, aggressivity, difficult behavior. These were institutionalized children. O.J. Handy was inserting multiple electrodes into various portions of these children's brains. He was stimulating them, and then he was burning holes in their heads with the electrodes by heating them up. And he was then studying the children who walked around on the ward with wires dangling out of their heads. And he was the first project I stopped. In the 1990s, many years later, my wife Ginger and I discovered that there was a eugenical program sponsored by multiple agents in the federal government called the Violence Initiative, the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. They were going to start studying African American kids in the womb to see what made them grow up to be so violent. Not racism, not unemployment. They weren't going to look at that. They weren't going to look at gangs. They weren't going to look at who sells all the drugs to these kids and then gets them selling the drugs as their way to make money. They weren't going to look at anything real. They were going to experiment on these children. And Ginger and I took 4 or 5 years out of our lives. We wrote a book called The War Against Children of Color, and we stopped the program. Do you know they still do electroshock treatment on children, not just adults? About 2 months ago, we finally, with me as a medical expert, had a big victory in court where a judge declared that he was going to let us go to trial because I had developed and shown enough scientific information that shock treatment caused brain damage that this judge decided that he was going to allow a trial on whether an individual had had brain damage from shock treatment. Within a day or two, the company settled. The company made an admission to the FDA that shock treatment causes brain damage and significant memory loss, and we thought, what a victory. And within 2 or 3 days later, a mere 2 or 3 days later, the device people, not vice, but device people at the FDA, for the first time came out and openly approved ECT as safe and effective. So this is a prelude to something that a lot of Americans, not generally physicians or doctors or psychiatrists or government officials, but the public's beginning to realize that our children are drowning in drugs. And we've got probably at least 20% of our boys diagnosed ADHD and on drugs. And the drugs don't work. We know with absolute clarity that the drugs don't help the kids, but they do stunt their growth, give them cardiovascular problems, make them addiction prone. We know all that. Well, now we get to why I'm talking to you. My friend Michael Cornwall, a psychologist in California, sent me a notice that the FDA had approved something new for ADHD in children, that children would now, with a prescription from their doctor, be able to get a little machine that their parents or guardian could put electrodes on their foreheads to stimulate their brains with an electrical current strong enough to affect the functioning of the entire front of the brain, to leave it there all night long for day after day after day.
Battery-powered device offers a non-drug treatment. It's a small electrode patch connected to a battery-powered stimulator.
The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat childhood ADHD.
The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat ADHD in children.
It's something that is first of its kind. It delivers electric pulses to your kid's brain while your kid sleeps.
A small adhesive patch is put onto the forehead. It then delivers a low-level electrical pulse to the parts of the brain that cause ADHD symptoms.
It's worn on the forehead, usually overnight, and that triggers branches of the sensory trigeminal nerve, where they're thought to interact with nearby brain structures that affect hyperactivity. The head of the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation says, while it's not clear how this affects hyperactivity, we do know that behavioral brain circuits are complex.
And by affecting those circuits, sometimes with electrical stimulation, as is the case with this device, we can therefore affect the illness itself.
The device from NeuroSigma was just approved, and it's available by prescription, but it's another tool in the armamentarium.
Now that's a pretty massive intrusion. They even know the various parts of the brain that are being affected, and they claim it relates to ADHD. It actually relates to the entire functioning of the child. The frontal lobes are affected, the limbic system's affected, and then they say, that has to do with ADHD. No, that has to do with being a child, being a human being. It's the whole integrating higher part of the brain is being stimulated. It's kind of a mild electroshock that goes on and on and on, and it bears similarity to a lobotomy because the current's going to go through the same areas that they used to love so much to slice up. The frontal orbital areas, it's right behind the eyes, it's right where the lobotomists used to like to go in and damage the human brain.
The very choice of name for this brain interface technology that's supposed to be a psychiatric treatment for ADHD and useful for many applications, the very name of this product is astounding because the butterfly has long been a symbol of the human soul in its transitory life from physical human form into an immortal form where there's no body containing it. Ancient Greek mythology, the talks of Plato, the work of Ovid and the Metamorphosis, all of these encompass aspects of the myth of Psyche, who married Cupid, who was made immortal by Zeus. And this figure Psyche herself is a representation of the human soul personified, but is also symbolized by the butterfly, because the butterfly starts in a pupal stage as a crawling worm. It goes through the chrysalis stage, where it's effectively dormant, dead in a certain sense inside the chrysalis, and then it's reborn into a creature with wings that could fly freely. And for the ancient Greeks and other ancient philosophers, this was representative of the human soul. And it's also been a symbol of mind control in the more recent times. Although it remains in the foray of rumor, the idea of Project Monarch carries a heavy symbolic weight and reflects the very real documented efforts of dabbling in mind control and reprogramming the brain.
In the 1970s, the public was confronted for the first time with the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency had carried out a bizarre series of behavior modification and mind control experiments on unwitting citizens in what CIA Director Alan Dulles referred to as the battle for the minds of men.
The first thing that needs to be said is it's an experimental procedure.
We see here the possibility for direct physical manipulation of the mind.
We know that efforts took place, we just don't know if they used the name Monarch. But if they did use that name, it would have been very meaningful and perhaps poignant and just eerily creepy as to what they're talking about being able to do, to transform the mind in a certain sense, to create a new type of human, to be able to program people according to someone else's will.
Delgado has remote control of the animal.
The electrical stimulator in the skull responds to radio stimulation. The bull becomes non-aggressive. Does it tamper with mind?
Aggression can be evoked or inhibited.
So with that as a background, it's very creepy that this company, NeuroSigma, used the name Monarch for their brain interface device that's to be used with children who are struggling with certain types of conditions and disabilities. It's very creepy because the actual name NeuroSigma itself is a species of butterfly, and of course it's a play upon words, with neuro referring to the science of the brain. It's just really astounding and kind of a slap in the face.
Now, this is a pretty dramatic thing to do to children. It's never been approved for the treatment of a brain. If you look at other instruments that are putting electricity through your muscles or something, they tell you, don't do this to your brain. Don't put it on your head. Because see, the brain is the highest evolutionary achievement on Earth and maybe in the universe, the human brain. We don't know how it works. We don't have any Einstein to tell us about it. It's too complicated. We barely have, we don't even have a Newton. We don't have any great neuroscientist to tell us how it's working. It's far more mystery than a known area. We talk about the surface of the sea versus the deep sea. Our knowledge of the brain is beyond metaphor, how small it is compared to the complexity of the brain. After all, you wouldn't be listening, I wouldn't be speaking. None of this could go on without the most complicated organ in the universe being active. Just couldn't happen.